One of the biggest mistakes I see players making playing low stakes PLO is that they are cold calling too many hands in position pre-flop. Not only do I see this myself playing low stakes PLO, I also notice it when going over population tendencies for the low stakes players. In today's lesson, we're going to look specifically into this scenario, and we're going to split it up into two sections. First of all, we're going to look into cold calling versus a tighter range. And secondly, in the next episode, we're going to look into cold calling versus a wider range in position. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Crushing Small Stakes PLO course. Calibration is key. What do we mean by this? Calibration means that we have to evaluate the hand strength based on the situation at hand. In other words, before we enter a pot, we have to ask ourselves different questions to come up with an answer whether or not to play the hand. When we are deciding whether to cold call in position or not, we have to think about different scenarios and different questions. Things like, how wide is my opponent open raising here? And how does my hand play against that open raising range? How many players are behind me? How likely is it that we enter a multi-way pot when I do cold call? And do I want to pull in the players behind me, or do I want to push them out of the pot by perhaps 3-betting? Are we in position or out of position? Like, those questions are important, and all these things have to do with calibration. You have to calibrate your hand based on the situation at hand. The same hand doesn't play the same way when these variables are changing. Therefore, it's important to be very critically when it comes to this situation, and that calibration is an important factor. Let's look into this a little bit more closely. Let's look at some outcomes and what is likely to happen when we do decide to cold call on the button versus an early position open raising range. So first of all, we're going to look at the tighter open raising range. So we are sitting on the button and the early position player is open raising. Now, if we do decide to cold call here in real games, that's what we're focusing on here, we are entering a pot on the flop 31% of the time heads up in position. A multi-way single raise pot, so when one of the players in the blind come into the pot, or maybe both, that will happen 60% of the time. And we get squeezed by one of the players in the blinds 9% of the time. So you can already see what is very important here. And that is that we have to calibrate the hand that we're entering the pot with towards multi-way pot playability. We want to play hands that are nutted and that do well in multi-way scenarios, because as you can see, 60% of the time the pot will be multi-way. Now, different questions to ask yourself before you enter the pot are the following, and here are some examples to help you out here. For example, does my hand play better heads up or multi-way? In other words, is my hand very nutted? And do I want to pull in players from the blinds? Or is my hand more non-nutted? And when it's smooth as well, often double suited, it perhaps plays better with a 3-bet to push out players in the blind and play a heads up pot. Who is behind me? Do I want to bring in players in the blind? If they are very weak, recreational players, if I want to get them in and it's likely that we can gain extra EV and extra money by bringing them into the pot? Or do I want to push them out by 3-betting? And do I have fold equity if I do decide to 3-bet? For example, regulars tend to fold more often versus a 3-bet than recreational players, so those things are important to think about as well. And these are example questions that you can ask yourself before you enter the pot and whether you decide to cold call, perhaps 3-bet, or maybe even fold here. Now let's make a comparison, button versus early position, and look at how the population is playing at the moment and how GTO recommendations are. If we look at population tendencies playing PLO 50, we can see that on average, players are cold calling 17.1% of the time, button versus early position, and 3-betting 7.8% of the time. If you look at GTO recommendations for PLO 50 for the same stake, we can see 9.6% cold calling only. So much less than the 17.1% that players are cold calling at the moment. 3-betting 5.8%, also a little bit less there. If you compare this with different stakes, PLO 500, we can see that the cold call frequency goes up to 13.6%, but the 3-bet frequency remains very similar. Going up to PLO 5000, we can see that the cold call frequency actually increases to 18%. So that cold call frequency that players on PLO 5000 are capable of making, that is almost the same as that most players are currently doing at PLO 50. The 3-bet range for PLO 5000 also 5.1%. So you can see that the 3-bet range remains very, very similar, but the cold call frequency is where the biggest difference comes when it comes to different stake levels and different rake structures. The higher the rake is, and the lower you're often playing, the lower stakes, the tighter your cold call range should become. The higher stakes you play, where the rake is relatively lower, the more you can cold call. And I think this is important to keep in mind and to remind yourself of, that we playing low stakes PLO, that our cold call strategy should be very tight and well defined here. Now let's look into some hand examples and into our range here to get a better understanding of what we are supposed to do here. This is a breakdown of button versus early position with our entire range. Below you can see the 18 preflop categories again, going from double suited aces on the left all the way down to single suited and rainbow double paired hands on the right. And we will go into a couple of these ranges to get a better understanding. When we look at double suited aces and single suited aces, you can see them on the left. They are all in the bright green bars. In other words, that's the 3-betting color. So aces basically are supposed to always be a 3-bet here, button versus early position. When we look at Broadway pairs and mid-low pairs, both double suited and single suited, we can see very, very much a big difference in comparison to aces. You can already see that there's almost no 3-betting range here. That the cold call range is specifically there with double suited Broadway pairs. And that with those other 3 categories, that also the cold calling range is very tight and well defined, and only very few specific combos get in there and are strong enough to cold call with button versus early position. Now let's look into these categories a little bit more closely by showing some hand examples. We're going to look at kings and queens specifically, because that is often a group of hands that is overplayed, where people make mistakes, and these hands can be overvalued by many of you, including myself sometimes, especially playing against a tight open raising range. So if we look at kings that are double suited, we can see that we are supposed to call 89% of the time, and that we are 3-betting only 11% of the time. Hands that we are cold calling here are hands like ace, king, king, queen, double suited. These hands are obviously also strong enough to 3-bet, but the reason that we are deciding to cold call them is that we really don't want to get 4-bet with this hand, because then we would be in big problems facing a 4-bet. So one of the very, very strongest ace, king, king, double suited candidates rather just call versus a tight range instead of going for that 3-bet. Some of the combinations that do go for a 3-bet could be ace, king, king, deuce, double suited, with the lower side cards and the mid side card. Like those hands are often used as a 3-bet, but the very, very best ones like ace, king, king, queen, double suited are just going to be a cold call in position. You can already see that double suited kings are only a 3-bet 11% of the time, so the far majority is just going to be a call, and we're not folding double suited kings here. Let's look at kings that are single suited in rainbow. 46% of the time we're folding. So a lot of kings are actually folding here. 50% calls, 4% 3-bet. Hands that we are folding, king, king, 7-4 single suited, as well as king, king, 10-5 single suited with the 10 high suit. Like, I'm pretty sure that most of you would cold call this hand in position versus early position here on the button, including myself. And the fact that we are overvaluing them shows us that we are not completely aware and understanding that how this hand actually is supposed to be played, and how careful we are supposed to be with kings here in this situation. Folding 46% of all the single suited kings here, that is a very, very high frequency, of course. Hands that we are calling, ace, king, king, 7, as well as king, king, jack, 7 here, those hands are strong enough to call. They either have a nut suit with the ace, or they have connectivity and high card value. So we want to look at hands that are better connected and that will flop better, and have better playability, both in a single raise pot imposition as well as in a multi-way pot. Also, these hands play much better in case we get squeezed, which we are then capable of calling instead of the fact that we have to fold when these kings are very disconnected. The candidate to 3-bet here could be ace, king, king, deuce with the king high suit. That hand doesn't play great multi-way. We can use it as a 3-bet here. And we don't really benefit from bringing in the blinds because of the fact that we don't have a nut suit here. Those hands are often used as a 3-bet with a non-nut suit. Queen, queen double suited, 17% fold, 68% calling, and 15% 3-betting. Queen, king 7, 3 double suited. You can see that with queens we are already starting to fold some double suited combinations. With kings we didn't, because kings are much stronger. But the weakest and the most disconnected queens are just supposed to be a fold, even being double suited. We are 3-betting hands like ace, queen, queen 7 here. That hand is strong enough to go for the 3-bet. We can also call it if you know that your opponent is never folding kings, for example, pre-flop. Then then the value of 3-betting here drops quite a bit there. So cold calling there would also be fine. But in general, ace, queen, queen, X with like a low side card are often used to go for a 3-bet here. Let's look at queens that are single suited rainbow. 74% folding, so already a massive increase here. 21% call only, 5% 3-bet. We're gonna look into some hands that we're calling. Ace, queen, queen, jack. This hand is too strong to turn into a 3-bet. We absolutely don't want to risk getting 4-bet here, so we're just calling. The hand does play well both in a single raise pot in position heads up, but also multi-way we do decently well here. And the hand is just too strong to turn into sort of a semi-bluff by 3-betting. Queen, queen, 9-8, single suited. This hand has enough connectivity, playability, both in a single raise pot, in position heads up, as well as multi-way. So we're just calling them. But these are already the bottom of our calling hands. So be careful not going wider there. You can see 74% are supposed to be a fold here. 3-bet, only a very few rare combinations. Very similar to the ace, king, king, deuce hand in the middle. Here we can 3-bet ace, queen, queen 3. With the non-nut suit, the hand doesn't play as great in a multi-way pot. We can sometimes push out kings, for example, if our opponent is capable of folding kings. And the hand also doesn't play that great in a multi-way scenario in a single raise pot because we lack nuttiness and we don't flop very, very well often here. Yeah, I think that is those examples to sort of use as a 3-bet there with the ace, king, queen 3 suited to the queen is a good example of a hand that we can add in. We have the ace, which the fact of blocking aces is obviously great here, reducing the chance of getting 4-bet. Going into the next group of hands here, which are the rundowns. Also want to highlight a few combinations here. In the middle, you can see there is some 3-betting here in the bright green bars. There is some cold calling with like the best connected ones, but there's also a big group that we are supposed to fold here. Let's look into it a little bit as well. Rundowns with 0, 1, and 2 gap that are double suited. 23% fold, 30% call, and 47% 3-bet. So against an early position, there's a good amount of 3-betting here, as well as calling and folding, so a good mix. Hands that are supposed to fold, where I see people calling them all the time, are these double suited mid and low rundowns with like 2 gaps or 3 gaps even. Like these hands are just supposed to be a fold. They are too weak given the circumstances, given our opponent's open raising range, as well as the fact that we will be dominated by higher suits if the blinds come in very often as well. So we don't really want to play those hands. The calling range, we have another example here, 7, 6, 5 deuce, double suited, also a hand too weak to enter the pot. You just fold it. Calling, 8, 7, 6, 5, perfect connectivity here. Great hand to just pull it or to just call here. Against tight ranges, it's important to notice that we don't want to 3-bet 8 high, 7 high rundowns. Our 3-betting range sort of starts by 9 high rundowns and higher. So don't use 8, 7 high rundowns, double suited, even when they are strongly connected as a 3-bet against tight ranges. So therefore, this hand is just a call. We're obviously not folding. The hand is too strong there. and a hand that's capable of 3-betting. One of the bottom hands in our 3-betting range here. Again, I just told you the 9 is the starting point. So 9865 with like 1 gap or 0 gaps, like that is the starting point of 3-betting here. If the hand would be dull, if the hand would have 2 gaps, we're obviously folding. You just saw it there on the left, 9854, it's a fold. But this hand is a starting point of 3-betting here. Rundowns, 0, 1, 2 gaps that are single suited. You can already see a massive increase here. And this is one of the categories where I think most of you are making the biggest mistakes. Overvaluing connected single suited rundowns, often 2 gappers. Like those hands are just so often a fold. And I see people calling them all the time. And against early position ranges, you have to be very careful here because domination is a big issue. The majority is a fold. I'm going to show some hands that are calling. Hands like 6, 5, 4, 3, King 10, 9, 8, and Ace, Queen, Jack 10. So nut suit with the Ace, Queen, Jack 10. Perfect connectivity with the mid and low connection hands like 6, 5, 4, 3 is good enough to call here because we have that perfect connectivity. And we do play a part of the board that where we can play pretty good post flop basically. If high cards come, we have an easy fold, for example. If low cards come, we can be deceptive and can hit very strongly here. So perfect connectivities with the lower ones. The king high, King 10, 9, 8 is a call with the king high suit. With a 10 high suit, it would be a clear fold. And the 10, 9, 8 is connected enough there together. But be careful with 2 gappers in general. This is definitely the bottom of a 2 gapper call there. In general, focus on nuttiness with the nut suit or perfect connectivity like the bottom one. A hand to 3-bet here. You can see only 3% 3-betting here with single suited rundowns. Unsuited to the ace here. Again, we saw it before as well. The fact that we don't have the nut suit won't make us want to call that often anymore, but rather just 3-bet, use it sort of as a 3-bet bluffing candidate here. We can push out higher suits and pairs. We don't mind doing that. Our hand also plays better heads up than in a multi-way pot. And we are still perfect connected here with like a hand like Ace, Queen, Jack 10, single suited to the Queen here. That is a candidate of going for the 3-bet here, even against early position. 3 Broadway plus 1 non-Broadway double suited. It's also strongly connected here, but we have 1 disconnected side card here. 15% fold, double suited. We are calling still quite a bit, 49%, and 3-betting 36% of the time. Hands to call, Queen, Jack, 10 deuce double suited, as well as Ace, Queen, Ace, King, Queen, deuce double suited. Like these are hands that we want to call here. They have enough playability, both heads up as well multi-way. They have nuttiness. We don't really want to turn them into a 3-bet here. To 3-bet against the tight range, we want to have stronger hands or better connection, basically. So a hand like Ace, Jack, 10, 7 double suited is a good candidate to go for a 3-bet here. The tighter your opponent's open raising range becomes, the more connected all your hands should be when you decide to go for that 3-bet. Lastly, 3 Broadway plus 1 non-Broadway that are single suited, 82% folding, like a massive amount. People are cold calling also these hands way too often. Look at this, it's mainly a fold. Only few candidates are capable of calling, 14%, and 4% is a 3-bet. Even a hand like King, Jack, 10, 7 single suited to the King. We have 3 gaps. We should just muck this one. There's too much disconnection here. Against a tight range, we just don't do as well. Calling, hands like Ace, Jack, 10, 4 single suited to the ace, as well as Ace, King, Queen, deuce single suited to the ace. Like we have nuttiness and some connectivity here. The fact that we have the nut suit makes our hand enough strong to go for that call. But without the nut suit here, these hands would already be a fold. I hope those examples gave you a good idea of those 2 categories, like the rundowns and before we saw the pairs. Here we see the breakdown of our range again. We didn't talk about the last 2 categories, like the rundowns, which are more disconnected, the ones that I'm highlighting here, as well as the double paired hands. I want to challenge you to go into the bucket tool yourself, or the PLO trainer as we call it now, and check these ranges out and see what you can learn there. Do it the same way as I'm doing it here. I know that cold calling, if we talk about cold calling, it means we also should talk about 3-betting because they are so much correlated together. That's why I also showed some 3 betting candidates today, as well as cold calling, as well as folding. They are all very closely together, and that's why it's important to show these subtle differences between the different outcomes and between the different actions that we want to take. I know I get a lot of questions also about, well, 3-betting, how to 3-bet if my opponent is folding less often than GTO. Well, this is something that we will look into in the future also. I first have to investigate it a little bit more, get a better understanding, perhaps run some simulations for it, and then when I figure out something that is worth sharing, I will definitely do it. But for now, we have to go with what we know now, and we'll definitely also add in 3-bet strategy versus players that don't fold as often. So that is a final note that I want to share you, because it's a question I get often, and because we talked today about some 3-betting candidates, I see questions popping up like, is this hand then a 3-bet? And we have to work with what we know right now, and we will add new information once we have a better understanding of it. Okay, I hope this helped you a lot about button versus early position cold calling. Check out the next video where I'm talking about button versus cutoff. We go through a similar way of explaining it, showing hand examples and breaking down the categories of these two high pairs and the rundowns. And that way you can also see the differences between button versus early position cold calling, as well as button versus cutoff cold calling. So I'll see you there. Take care, and talk to you soon.